We are live back with another episode of the Common Sense Show. And today I'm having a conversation with Dr. Carrie Heller. And we're talking about ADHD in adults, hacks that work to be able to overcome some of the challenges that can be overwhelming for those with ADHD, especially in business, right? We have so much to do in business on a regular basis. And we have a bunch of different tasks that can be not just overwhelming, but it may not be the task that is necessarily difficult. It's just the sheer volume of stuff that we have to do on a daily basis. Marketing, sales, operations, human resources, executive management, executive functions. Like there's a whole bunch of different things that we have to do on the regular basis. And it gets even harder if you suffer from ADHD, right? And so we're going to talk to Dr. Heller about that. And we're going to just jump right into some strategies that you can use, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. All right. So stay tuned. We're going to ping, and I'll bring Dr. Heller up. And Dr. Heller, welcome to the Common Sense Show.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, no worries. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into specializing specifically in ADHD and executive function challenges, and what brings you to like this kind of focus, this specialty in your career?
Sure. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm based in Bethesda, Maryland, and do a lot of stuff virtually at this point, so I can see people in 42 states. But what really got me interested in ADHD in particular is the fact that it's really common as far as disorder goes, both in kids as well as in adults. But at the same time, there's often a focus on just either deal with it or take medicine. But even with medicine, it doesn't, whether you take medicine or not for it, you don't magically get the executive functioning skills to effectively plan, organize, and it can really be debilitating in someone's life far more than I think people a lot of times realize. And so I think I got really focused in this area to really help people to, basically be more efficient, healthier, happier, and essentially thrive more, with ADHD by, learning some practical strategies and really kind of, hitting an area that I think a lot of times people really don't think about, but is, crucial.
Excellent. And we're going to get to those strategies, those hacks, as they say, in 2025 a little bit later. But before we kind of go into our conversation, I just want to make one point that if you're watching this or listening to this on podcast form, this is not medical advice from Dr. Heller to you who are listening. This is for informational purposes only. So while there may be things that you hear that you may personally want to try, you should do so in conjunction with your own mental health doctor. All right. So let's talk about let's first identify how a person might come to know that there's something going on in their brain, like an entrepreneur, where they might start with a self-identification of what's going on before they pursue help externally.
Right. So a lot of times, people realize they may have ADHD from, first recognizing that there are certain challenges they may have around, staying focused, doing things, especially things they don't enjoy. Which, I realize there's a little bit of irony in that, just because usually people like to enjoy stuff, that want to do stuff that they enjoy doing. But the idea is that, people without ADHD can focus at least a little bit better on the stuff they don't really care to do, but have to do. But with ADHD, it's around the self-regulation of attention. So the problem is, if you really don't enjoy something, you're not stimulated by it, it makes it that much harder to actually focus. There's also the organization piece. So having a hard time, keeping track of tasks, missing meetings or deadlines, not being able to plan effectively, being late places. There's sort of a lot of kind of common, sort of stereotypes in a sense, but, there are also sort of symptoms associated with disorder. And so that's often, some of those kind of hallmarks are often kind of someone's first red flag that, oh, hey, maybe there's this issue, I have this trouble. What could be the cause of it, and how do I make it better?
You've probably heard a million times, like I have, from a person who gets distracted by something, maybe one or two things, and they're like, oh, my ADD brain or my ADHD brain, where they may not necessarily have the actual condition. When does missing things or being distracted or getting frustrated by multiple things that need to be done become the condition? Does it start to approach having the condition?
Well, so, on the one hand, technically, according to the criteria, someone's supposed to have had symptoms from childhood, like prior to age 12. I mean, a lot of times people get diagnosed for the first time in adulthood, and if you look back at the history, the symptoms are probably there in some capacity, but they don't realize it as a kid. But the point is that it's not like it's something that suddenly, if everything was perfectly fine and then you hit 40 and suddenly there's all these issues. Well, it's possible it's undiagnosed ADHD. It's also highly possible it's something else if you've never had any symptoms whatsoever. But some people can cope better than others up to a certain point.
That's an excellent point, actually, because I think as we get older, we kind of start to tend to self-diagnose ourselves with like a bunch of different random stuff, which is why WebMD is so popular. And also, like, you go from shopping for cold medicine to shopping for caskets in about 5 minutes. But like, for people who, or adults who may have had it from when they were young to or younger till adulthood, and they kind of knew there was something wrong, it definitely is worth kind of getting it getting it taken a look at. Let's talk about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are often overloaded with many different things to do. In my introduction to our conversation, I was talking about how entrepreneurs often have to perform 5 or 6 crucial functions in a business that normally would be handled each individual one by one person in a larger business. How can a person who suffers from ADHD and is easily overwhelmed by having to accomplish multiple tasks on a regular basis, and who easily gets disorganized, be able to handle high-level tasks in a functional way?
Sure. I mean, I think there are a variety of things that you can do. I mean, the first thing is, on some level, a sense of acceptance, of to acknowledge this is hard. There is a lot I have to do. It's realistically hard. Because I think sometimes if people push off, oh, this is easy, I should get it.
Right.
Then they may sort of keep pushing through without actually trying to make a change. But I think, aside from that, a lot of it is taking a step back and looking at, what are the different tasks you need to do? How much of it is planned out? Because if part of it is you're overwhelmed because it's all in your head and it's not planned out, then you're itself more likely to forget to do things.
Now, are there some like basic exercises that they actually, what? Let me save that question. I'm going to save this question. So if you're watching this podcast, it's all about the payoff. At the end, I'm going to ask Dr. Heller, what are some of the basic exercises that one can do in order to kind of put themselves together, what kind of plan can you create for yourself in order to actually successfully manage some of the diversions that you might have from ADHD on a regular basis? But before I do that, I want to talk about work and how one might be able to focus on, are there some kind of micro tools that adults can use during the day if they find themselves getting off track? Maybe a person's watching this does not own their business, but maybe they are a corporate worker, and so they're at their desk, they find themselves getting easily distracted. Are there some kind of like acute things that they can do to kind of snap themselves back into concentration?
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a few things. I mean, on a practical level, having a sense of structure of where you should be doing in the first place, in that moment can be helpful. So making a plan for the day of, roughly what you're going to do when. So if you start to lose focus and you say, oh, what was I supposed to be doing? You at least have something written you can look at and go back to. I think some of it's also recognizing that people can only focus for a period of time to begin with, and then your mind starts to wander. I mean, it's kind of why the Pomodoro method is fairly common. This idea that because people can only focus, optimally for maybe 25 minutes or so, having kind of a 25-minute work period and maybe a 5-minute break can help people to get less fatigued and in turn be more productive during the time they're working. So if you're starting to zone out a lot, looking at realistically, how long have you been working for without a break? Because if you've been going for an hour or two, it would be quite normal to start to zone out and maybe not necessarily be as focused. So I think taking step breaks can be one thing. And also, I mean, for anyone that has ever had, I mean, I certainly have had experience where, I've been sitting for a really long time looking at something. I just can't quite figure out what I want to say. I go for, a walk around the office or the block or something and, come back and I can then just get it done because I've, had that sort of mental reset. So I think that can be very helpful.
And does that reset actually happen that quickly? Just 20 or 30 minutes getting up, standing up or walking around? Does that reset actually help, or does it kind of just calm a part of your brain that's actually being overwhelmed at the moment?
I mean, I think it depends on the person. The hard part with a lot of this stuff is there's not one size fits all with ADHD. And so for some people, taking a quick break for a couple of minutes, resetting, coming back, and they can focus a lot better. For others, the hard part is getting back into a task once you've left it, which is why there's often a tendency to want to keep pushing through stuff and not take breaks. Probably one of my favorite strategies to recommend to people is the idea of getting movement in while you're working.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like if you have your own business and you have your own sort of desk set up, having a sit-stand desk, maybe having they make these desk ellipticals that are like this big. You can basically pedal while you're working. And so the idea, or you can use a treadmill and walk under the desk. They make a bike version.
Right.
I've tried the Stairmaster version. That one doesn't work quite as well sitting, but you can still use it standing. Or there are also balance boards you can stand up. But the idea basically is essentially what happens with ADHD is you're not stimulated enough. So if whatever the task you're doing is not stimulating, it's not going to occupy all your focus. But if you take the extra physical movement in, but you put that with the task, in a lot of ways, it can help you to sort of basically get enough stimulation that you then can be focused on whatever the task is. And so the idea is, as long as the movement is mindless, that can be a really great way to help people to sort of improve their focus and be able to sustain attention better.
The problem with a work elliptical, like a desk elliptical, is that you might be bouncing up and down on a meeting. That's
well, actually, so it's actually you actually can't see that you're doing it.
Really?
Yeah.
I've never seen you know what? I'm gonna have to find
here. Let me just adjust this for a second. I went under my desk, so I just adjust it for a sec. But so I just started pedaling, but you don't actually see me moving.
Right. Okay. Oh, so it's actually like on the floor.
Right. So it's on the it's basically a. Do you want me? I can hold it up if you want. Is that helpful?
Sure. Yeah. Let's take a look at it. Ah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I think that's one idea that could really help. Or another idea for people, especially if they like physical movement and want something that they feel like is sort of fun and different, would be something like this. It's called a whirly board.
Oh yeah.
So basically, you stand on it. You can technically use it while you're sitting with your feet.
Right.
But basically, the idea is essentially by getting some movement in, or with the boards, you have to you almost are moving a little bit to hold yourself still in a sense. And so it's because it's subtle, you don't really have to think about it. Because the problem is with like a hand fidget, for example, is like, let's say I use this. Like this is, a grasp where you could squeeze and people could use it. For a Zoom meeting, you can hold it. And as long as you're not looking at it, no one's going to know it's there. But the problem is if I'm looking at it like this, I'm clearly focused on that and not on whatever I'm supposed to be doing. So it doesn't really help in the same way.
Is that where stimming behavior comes from? Like clicking the pins or whatever the case is that a person's doing with ADHD, like trying to recapture focus on something in front of them?
I don't know in terms of like the terminology of that. It's because a lot of times when people have hyperactivity, so like the excessive movement, it's often mindless to start. Like people don't usually intentionally say, I'm going to start shaking my leg. It oftentimes happens without thinking about it first. And then at some point they realize it, and then maybe they like how it feels, they keep doing it. So in some ways it's, it becomes sort of intentional trying to do it, but it usually doesn't start out that way.
Interesting. So it becomes like a mindless self-soothing behavior where they just kind of do it because, like you said, it feels good or something. Just
right, but it makes great stimulation. So it's sort of like if basically if you have an adult who's sitting at a desk doing a really boring task, if they have ADHD, and again, not everyone with ADHD is very hyperactive, and hyperactivity tends to dissipate in adulthood overall anyway. But let's say you have someone that's doing a really boring task, they're probably more likely to shake their legs and fiddle with stuff. But let's say, I don't know, you give them a video game to play. The same person was a kid or adult. If they're super engrossed in video game, they may actually be sitting very still. Whereas doing a different activity in the same exact seat, they may be acting very differently.
So how does an entrepreneur who has multiple tasks and things like that to accomplish during the day, and how do they order their focus? Is it the fidgeting is one thing, but or kind of taking breaks is another thing, but I'm assuming that it's also kind of tracking your work, tracking your thoughts.
Right. And at some point the work has to get done. You can't just take breaks and move around. You have to actually get the work done. So some of it is basically having it organized in a way that you know what to do, which also reduces feeling as overwhelmed. Because if you're feeling very overwhelmed, you're going to be less productive to begin with. So there's also the aspect of reducing distractions, and also, trying to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Basically to automate stuff as much as you can. Because if you look at think about like with an entrepreneur, think about all different tasks you have to do. Like what's most pressing in the moment that you absolutely have to do. What theoretically you should do, but probably not gonna have the biggest harm if you don't do it today, but you should do. Like marketing and things like that. And what are the things that eat up so much time? Like for example, responding to emails.
Right.
And so looking at how can you cut down, like say, like for if you have a company and you're constantly responding to phone calls, depending on how long the person talks for, you can't really plan exactly how long the call is going to be, or when you're going to call them back. But if you have, let's say, set call times, for example, and you say during these hours I'm going to return phone calls, and you have that time blocked out in your schedule, then that that's where that time is going to go, and you don't have to then mess up any other plans to figure out, oh, let me try to call this person back at this time when I already had planned to do other marketing stuff or something. So sometimes like structuring the time within reason can be helpful.
Is there often anxiety that goes along with the feeling of not getting something done? Or I should say, we all have anxiety, excessive anxiety related to not getting stuff done. Or is it more like a feeling of frustration that there's all this stuff that has to be done that's just not being done because, as you mentioned, if it's not in a time block or something like that, it seems like it keeps falling through the cracks.
I mean, I think it really depends on the person because, in some cases, people with ADHD often tend to do better getting stuff done at the deadline because there's a sense of anxiety at that point of the pressure. But if somebody's, doing a week, there's less of a focus on, oh, I should get it done because there's not really that sense of like a time crunch. So, for some people with ADHD, especially if they don't have a lot of anxiety, the worry about getting it done well in advance is not there. I mean, there's probably worry right at the deadline. But, for people that have anxiety in ADHD, the anxiety sometimes is what helps get things done because the fear of not getting it done, can sometimes override some of the ADHD symptoms to help them to get stuff done. Not always, but sometimes it does create greater self-awareness of that you're not getting stuff done. But I do think the feeling of just feeling overwhelmed, that knowing you have a lot to do, not just feeling like you can't get it done, sometimes not even knowing where to start, I think that is quite common.
That's interesting that the feeling of anxiety actually produces focus in a person with ADHD, especially at a deadline. That seems like almost like a superpower.
Well, and the interesting thing about it is there's some people that really thrive on that, have gotten by in life, and so it works out sort of okay depending on what your tasks are. The problem is if you have a task you can't do in one sitting, that makes it hard. But also, if you think about entrepreneurs, oftentimes you have to put the structure into your day. No, people aren't going to do it for you for the most part. So that's where the challenge is. If you can't create that structure, it's much harder to really thrive. So you have to figure out how do you create a structure, whether it's you have a lot of appointments and you basically weave in other stuff around that, or you schedule certain stuff in a way that allows you to kind of have breaks between stuff, but like to figure out what works for you, because each person is different, but also the kind of job that you're doing is different in terms of what the needs are.
What time management tools have you seen work for your patients?
I mean, in general, like my strong recommendation for most things is to write them down in some way. So oftentimes using electronic task lists like Todoist, TickTick, Asana, even the reminders app, things like that can be really good because basically if you can sort of put in here are the tasks, here's when it's due, but then also to allocate specific time blocks to those tasks. So not just to say, here's a list of 10 things I need to do at some point, but to actually say, I think this thing will take about 20 minutes. So I'm going to allocate time at, 1:20 to do this. So that, the idea then is that basically you have kind of a day-by-day plan of here's what I'm going to do. Here's a rough sense of how long it's going to take. It's not going to be perfect, and you always have to sort of adjust, but to use that as a starting point.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I find that ironically, the choosing of the productivity tool probably it might produce more anxiety in people than actually using the productivity tool, because there are a million productivity tools out there and time management tools out there. Is in terms of let's talk about the choosing then, because the advice is use one of these tools and they can help you. However, it requires a person to go from today, here, right now, to get to actually choose a tool. What should that process be like? I mean, there's 5,000 tools out there. How do I choose the one that I need?
Right. And that can definitely be hard. I mean, my strong suggestion is take a step back and think about what are your actual needs first. Because you don't want to just like pick an app because someone said it was good and then try to fit all your stuff into it, because it may not be a good fit.
Right.
I think basically I would suggest, think about what features do you need. Do you need it to be able to share with other people? Do you want to have a calendar also built into it? Do you like color coding? Do you want subtasks? What programs, if any, do you want it to be able to integrate with? Like, so, a couple of kind of basic features, even like write this down, these are the features I want. Then, go and look at some programs, look at reviews, but look at which programs even have the features you're looking for. I mean, the other thing that's also important to keep in mind is, most task lists are probably more similar than they are different. And, one of the things I hear quite a bit from people is, oh, I've tried all these apps and they never seem to work for me. The problem is it's not just the app,
Right.
but it's also how you use it. And how,
Sure.
and there's still also, I think, a lot more planning skill involved in actually using a lot of the apps that I think people realize. Because even if you're good at putting the task in, setting a deadline, you have to figure out how to work backwards to actually get the stuff done by that deadline. So that's where I think people get confused sometimes trying to use them without a lot of guidance.
Having proper expectations for using them, I would say, is important, right? Because you have to say, okay, I know that if I'm going to download an app or a time tracker, time management, productivity tool, whatever, understanding that there's going to be some front load time where you have to kind of front load everything that you want in there so that it can actually perform for you, that will help reduce frustration. One of the things I know for me, being a zillennial, which is between X and millennial, right, is that I've lived in a world with both. And so, but I'm still pretty adept with technology. So for me, what helps is getting in my mindset that, okay, I know that I'm going to spend 2 or 3 hours just getting information in there. Input technology is all input output, right? So it's like what I put into this productivity tool is going to be what I get out of it. If I want complete ease of use and lack of frustration and more adaptability and more holistic integration into my life, I need to put as much information in there. That requires time. That time could be an hour, it could be 2 hours. Let me shoot for 4 hours, even though I know it might take 2, just to build in a time buffer for myself. And that my ability at times to think about kind of like how much time it's going to take actually to load the tool to actually use, it's actually really helpful in setting expectations about whether or not a tool is working or not, right? You have to use it, I think, to its full capacity before you make a determination about whether or not you want to discontinue using it, even for a period of time, which just means that it's going to take you a long time to get to the to the tool perhaps that you want to use for yourself.
Right. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I think also the idea here is that, taking the time to really research a tool and play with it a little bit before you enter everything is helpful, because you don't want to spend hours entering into one and then have to redo it into another. I mean, a couple of things you can keep in mind that help is that anything that involves a calendar, I mean, my strong suggestion is look for programs that sync with Google Calendar or Outlook or whatever like calendar program you maybe use as a starting point, because then you can basically transfer all your information into there automatically, so you don't have to re-enter stuff. And I mean, there some task list programs will transfer from like Google Tasks or the Reminders app. Like, so for example, TickTick,
Right.
if you had everything in the Reminders app, you can transfer it or import it into TickTick. So some programs do offer task list side of transferring from one program to another, but not all do. So that that is one way to sometimes cut down on the amount of time it takes to enter stuff. But also some programs are very intuitive. Like Todoist, for example, you can copy and paste a bunch of tasks from another place, like a Word document or wherever you want, and it'll usually go in pretty accurately. So that is sort of a faster way sometimes to transfer stuff into another program. But a lot of times people are starting out without having a lot of stuff written down in one good place to begin with. So sometimes there is actually a benefit of starting over and putting in from scratch rather than continue to transfer stuff from one program to another if it's not well organized to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about improving your focus, right? We kind of addressed it just slightly before, but improving focus obviously is like a key tenet in being able to execute well, especially in business. And how do you see what are some enemies of focus in your opinion?
I would say email can often be a big one. I mean, because I mean, it's vital for most businesses. It's very helpful in general. The problem is that I don't know about you, but like I could probably spend all day just responding to emails and not do anything else and still be busy all day.
I run 3 companies, so you can only imagine how many emails I get on a daily basis if I don't prioritize.
I imagine a lot. So the idea is basically when you're trying to focus on something, you want to basically block out whatever distractions you can. So for example, if you can minimize, depending on your job, you can minimize checking email, deactivate the temporary, notifications that pop up every time you have an email. Basically, put your phone on do not disturb. The idea is that essentially if there's nothing that's going to ping or, it directly interrupt you, you still have your thoughts, but that's one, if that's the main thing that would actually interrupt you, well, there's still stuff that can be done with that. You're going to be in much better shape because then you can really focus on whatever's right in front of you without all the extraneous stuff. I mean, it's sort of like if, being an entrepreneur, if you've ever, I don't know, worked on, let's say, a holiday or something where, maybe there's like, far less email and other stuff than normal, it's a very different feeling to work than a day where, you're constantly getting phone calls and texts and emails and while you're trying to get stuff done.
Have cell phones turned us all into Pavlov's dog? I feel like, I think you're right. I mean, I don't know. I say to my wife all the time, when I retire, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of my smartphone and get a flip phone, something that has very pared down features, and it would take me forever to text, so I won't want to do it, or I'll have to call or just wait till I get to my desktop to get an email. How has the notification features on cell phones, in your experience, kind of changed our human relationship with technology? Just the notification, not the phone. I think we know how the phone has changed it, but the notification, the ability to be notified the minute something happens. What do you think that's done to our psyche?
I mean, I think it depends on notification. Like if we're talking about like a reminder to do something, within reason, it can be very beneficial. But again, if we're talking about, here's a new email, here's, some other thing that is more about, I need to do this, or it's social media,
text, news stories.
I mean, it sort of primes you. I think on some level, it primes people to kind of expect instant gratification, be able to check it. I think it also, on some level, makes people a little more kind of conscientious of constantly thinking about, oh, what do I have? Because, how many email, I keep hearing the ding go off, but I can't check it right now. How many emails have I gotten? So I think it creates a sense, probably, a lot of people can create more anxiety potentially and more of a stronger feeling like I can't put it down. I mean, something you mentioned a minute ago about the idea of, when you retire and the idea of waiting to get to your computer is, to think about the fact that, especially if you're working in an office setting or working at home, in theory, you could try to treat your phone like a computer, where you try to keep it more or less in one place, put it in a dock even, if you use that as a way to prevent yourself from feeling you need to check it, 24/7.
I find that the physical separation between me and my phone helps out a lot. So for instance, purposefully leaving it on the charger downstairs when I'm upstairs or vice versa, it really does help you not even, if you don't hear the notifications, if you're not around it, you don't feel the buzz, it doesn't even tempt you to go even to pick it up. And it's actually relieving, and you're trying to figure out, why do I feel so much less, anxious, stressed, or whatever? It's because the phone is actually physically separated from you in a place where, okay, I would have to get up, walk down there and get it. I'm unlikely to do that when I'm already relaxing on the couch, right? I don't have to be entertained or communicated with at the moment. So I think that the physical separation between electronic devices and yourself, specifically your phone, it really is like a wonder drug when it comes to just having you not feel the need to pick it up every 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it can definitely be a nice, break, and certainly good for the mind. I mean, even to depending on what kind of phone someone has, if you have a tablet that you can sort of set up in a stationary place, trying to rely more on that or even the computer for checking stuff and less on your phone may also help reduce the reliance on the phone. Especially when you're in a stationary place anyway.
They say that I've seen different research. But it's anywhere between 145 times to over 200 times a day people pick up their phone. Compare that to I don't know, when I was born. I mean the first part of my life where you only had a phone when you got to it, and maybe you were picking up the phone 3-4 times a day, if that, maybe 2. Right? It's had a significant effect on anxiety. So I think that's a really important point about talking about improving focus, which is how much focus are you paying on things that really don't matter, right? Like things that are just kind of diverting your attention from things that actually do matter. And it's those little things that can be energy vampires too, right? I feel like you have a full battery of attention and focus and energy at the beginning of the day. And then throughout the day, the little pieces of things that happen in life, and including your phone, the notifications, picking up, checking, trying to figure it out, all those things chip away at different levels on the spectrum of your energy during the day, because it is focus. You have to read. If it's a notification, you have to figure it out. You have to think about kind of what you're reading. And at the end of the day, you can be absolutely wiped out just from like the nonsensical, non-essentials, trivialities of life.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. And that's where also, another big part of ADHD is sort of thinking about just general mental health in terms of, reducing stress, trying to, manage, being relaxed, which I know is far easier said than done. But,
Right.
that, you're going to function more optimally if you're not as stressed out and you're feeling more relaxed. And so in turn, even if you have a hard time focusing to begin with, you're still probably going to focus better if you're not as anxious or stressed out.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I'm about to ask Dr. Heller about how you can create a plan for yourself for the day so that you can battle your ADHD if you have it. What kind of planning hack does he have that will actually go a long way? But before I do that, I want to just ask you about the business that you've built. And so right now, you're able to virtually work with people in 42 different states, blending your coaching with helping individuals with executive functioning tasks and things like that. Tell me, why did you start that, and how's that going?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess it certainly go. We've had the practice for, let's see, I lost count. Since 2012. So I think about 13, 12. Yeah, it's about 13 years, I think.
Yeah, you do tend to lose count when you've been in business for a long time.
Yeah, so it's good. I mean, it's nice because I like being able to. It gives me sort of flexibility in what I do. Allows me to, sort of work with clients, really structure things, set them up in a way that I want, that I feel like is really helpful for people.
Right.
I also get variety, so I also do testing for ADHD as well. And so part of the day I spend doing testing, report writing, administrative stuff. And then, after the evenings, I tend, to spend more sort of doing sort of therapy and coaching. And so it's nice to sort of have that kind of split throughout the day. And also I think being able to sort of, even when I do testing, I think the knowledge I get from working with people helps me to make the recommendations in the testing sort of more helpful, because I actually know it's not just abstractly recommending all these things that in theory people could try doing, but I actually work with clients on a regular basis on the things I'm recommending.
And so you could do ADHD testing. Is it a lot of self-reported stuff?
I mean,
Self-reported tests?
so for adults, I mean, sometimes you do more of a comprehensive evaluation where it's, you can do it virtually, or, a lot of times it's in person, but basically, more of a thorough evaluation where you look at someone's cognitive functioning. So their memory abilities, processing speed, verbal skills, and then looking at attention and executive functioning, so planning, organizing. So it's a lot of standardized measures, as well as some self-report forms as well. And ideally getting some sort of other like informative report, like from a significant other or coworker or someone else that knows the person fairly well.
Awesome.
And then also looking at emotional functioning, because a lot of times, I mean, if someone's really anxious or depressed, that can often have mimic some of the ADHD symptoms as well.
Can you talk about that, flesh that out a little bit more?
Sure. So, okay, so if you see someone they can't focus, I mean, it's possible they can't focus because they have ADHD. It's possible they can't focus because they have anxiety. It's possible they can't focus because they have depression. So you have sort of the same symptom of trouble focusing, but it could be due to several different things. It also could be due to lack of sleep.
Yeah, interesting.
So there's, you have in a lot of cases the same symptom that, oftentimes can be due to several different things, which is why it's really important to sort of get a thorough evaluation and examine stuff, and not just assume, oh, I can't focus, I must have ADHD, because there can be many different reasons. I mean, there can be various medical issues as well. So, you want to sort of get a clear picture of what's going on and not just make an assumption.
Yeah, you kind of have to, I'm assuming, untangle the reason behind the behavior, right? Like you kind of have to remove those things from being intertwined to try to figure
exactly. I mean, one thing that I often use as a starting point, and again, it's certainly important to work with a professional on this and not just use what I'm going to suggest in a second as your only way of differentiating. But, when someone loses focus, one thing that can be very helpful to look at is what happens. Do they suddenly lose track of time, have no idea what's going on? Do they think about random stuff? Or they often think about things that worry them? So if someone's mind is often going to things that worry them, there's certainly more of a chance that there's at least some anxiety as part of it, because there's a sense of worry. Right. If there's almost no worry, and it's all just, time just suddenly disappears, or I'm thinking about this fun thing I want to go do. Certainly there's more of a chance that it may be more of an attention-based thing and not necessarily anxiety. But again, it's not one size fits all, but I think the idea of just understanding what happens when you lose focus can be a good starting point in trying to parcel it out.
This is just like a personal inquiry. Like, are there people for whom time evaporates and they have no idea how hours have passed? Multiple hours.
Yeah, I mean, like a common thing with ADHD it has been termed time blindness. It's the idea you're sort of just really not aware of time. You have no idea how long things take. It's just suddenly you just sit, and next thing you know, 5 hours have gone by, and you didn't get anything done. You have no idea where the time went or what you're even doing during that time.
Wow. You have no idea what you're doing. That is interesting. That's actually very interesting. Is it and these people often know that they're engaging in activity. They just can't really recount the purposefulness of the activity that they've engaged in.
I mean, I think it depends. I mean, I think on some level, I think what I was saying was, maybe a little bit of an overgeneralization. But the idea that basically, if you're sitting at a computer for 5 hours, you may, some people maybe just, going from one thing to another, getting stuff done, or you may sit there and maybe, maybe look at the news a little bit, and then, I don't know, check your fantasy football team, and then all this other stuff, and, look back and, don't have a clear sense of exactly what you did, but realize it wasn't really on task of what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there is a moment of realization at some point.
Right, like especially when a deadline passes.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's also having like time anchors.
Right.
Because if you, especially an entrepreneur, if you don't really have meetings, you have all day sort of to do stuff and you can do whatever you want, it doesn't really have much of a structure. But if you have certain time anchors, whether they're related to your job, whether, it's your family and you have to get kids off to school or pick them up from school, then sort of it creates, here are the hours I can work between things. And so then it creates more of a sense of urgency and more of a structure as opposed to being, I could do this whenever because I have all the time in the world to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That it really does, right? Because you kind of account down, if you, like you said, like let's just use the example you gave about picking up your kid from school. There's kind of a countdown to like picking up your kid from school. It's obvious a deadline that you have to meet. You have to be there in person. You know how long it takes for you to get there, more or less. And so like you're sitting at your desk and you know that, okay, I have a compressed window to get this in. And then I'm assuming that's when that part of the anxiety that you were talking about earlier kicks in. The deadline is picking up your kid. So work has to stop for a period of time before you come back at it again. And so you know that you have to get this stuff done. And so it's probably easier to get like 3 or 4 tasks done that that are relatively, 1 hour here, 2 hours here, 2 hours there. By the time you have to go pick up your kid, that makes a lot of sense. Let me go back to the planning piece because I do want to answer this. So here's the question. The question I asked earlier was, what kind of planning hacks do you have for those who are watching this? What are some things that they can do to create a structured plan for themselves if they have a hard time with executive management, executive functioning task for themselves?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing to do, and you guys can start right now, do it for today, is either take out a piece of paper, do it on a Word document, type it in a notes app somewhere. Basically, make a simple list of here are all the things that you need to get done today. So list them out. And then after you do that, put in parentheses next to it, like an estimate of either how long it takes or how long you feel like you should spend on it today. Like if it's not necessarily due right away or if it's something that's sort of open-ended.
Right.
Because basically if you have a list of here are the things you need or should do today, here's how long it should take. If you add up that total time, then see how much time do you actually have available today. So if your list, comes out to about 10 hours and you have about 6, clearly whatever plan you had is not going to work to get all that stuff done today, most likely. Yeah, but true. What you can do then is you can then figure out if you have 6 hours, look at what are the most pressing tasks from that list and how can you allocate time in that 6 hours to get done the most important things. So I think the idea is long term you want to plan further out, but to start just planning for the rest of today or make a plan for tomorrow at this point you could also do. And then this way you sort of have here are all the tasks, here's what actually is realistic to try to get done. But then also for the tasks that are left over that really don't fit into the plan, instead of just saying, I'll do it tomorrow, think about, look at your schedule. When are some good times you could chart those out? And then maybe sort of, put that in, make a note of where you're going to put it, block out time in a calendar for it, because then you start to make the plan more realistic.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And I do like the idea that you mentioned about like kind of parenthetically writing how much time you think it expected to take, because that it gives you a framework. It gives you a time anchor, like you said, right? Theoretically,
right, exactly.
Kind of how much it's going to take.
Yeah, and also like if you want, also tracking your actual time is also a really good way to improve time estimations. Like for example, there's a program called Toggl, Toggl, where basically you can either hit the start and stop button, or you can manually add it in after. But basically, by tracking how long certain tasks take, especially if it's tasks you tend to do over and over again, you're gonna have a much better sense of how to plan in the future if you know how long they take to start.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, I like that. Toggl, Toggl. Awesome. Yeah, so I think that's a great hack. I mean, I think that's a very useful one. And this show is about implementing things today, taking away something that a person could do, kind of low hanging fruit to kind of get themselves started. I think you've provided that. So Dr. Heller, tell me, what are you working on right now? What do you have in your pipeline, or that something that you're promoting right now that the people who are watching or listening might want to connect with?
Sure. So I do an executive functioning boot camp. It's basically a 2 hour intensive one-to-one session where basically we kind of look at like where are the challenges, what do you want to work on improve, and then we set up stuff during the session. So basically we set up a task list. We look at sort of where the time's going, where the challenges are, and kind of make a plan for everything. We write it out as we go. So you kind of leave the session with kind of a clear written plan of here's what I'm going to do on a day-to-day basis to plan more effectively, to get stuff done. Here's what I'm going to automate. But then, to the extent we can in the session, we set up the frameworks. Instead of saying, oh, now I need to go enter everything into the task list and get started, we do as much as we can during the session on that to begin with. So like the boot camp is certainly a big thing I do. And then I also have a program called ADHD Assist. It's basically an AI program where you can basically plug your tasks into it and it'll help you to plan it out. But it's also, fairly empathic in terms of like recognizing that these things can be challenging. So it's programmed basically using one of my books and some other articles I've written. So it basically, but it's really like tailored towards planning out tasks. So it's, because you can add a lot of the stuff if you have the right prompts into any AI program, but this one specifically really like honed in on how to effectively plan, but also how to teach you not just to rely on it long term, but to actually teach you how to do the planning for yourself. So it like teaches you as you plan how to help continue to plan more effectively.
Teach a man to fish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. That's great. Dr. Heller, appreciate your time today, and appreciate you coming on the Common Sense Show. I think that this is going to be a really important show for people who suffer from ADHD, who have to manage it and deal with it on a daily basis, and who need, some kind of frameworks to work in, some kind of planning solutions, because sometimes it's hard to, unless you know somebody who's dealt with it and have managed it and can understand what you're going through. Like sometimes it's hard enough being an entrepreneur. It's hard to be an entrepreneur who has to structure your own time during the day, and you have a hard time even doing that. So I think that this show is going to be really important for individuals who actually have the challenges that we've spoken about. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you bringing your expertise to the table today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks all for having me. This was a lot of fun chatting.
Absolutely. Well, he's Dr. Carey Heller. I'm Micah. Thank you for watching the Common Sense Show. Don't forget, if you are not subscribed to the show, click that notification bell, like the video so that you can get some more. You can get notified when I go live with another expert. Also, don't forget to click the link in the description that has a link to subscribe to my weekly newsletter, Small Business Mastery. Small Business Mastery will help teach you about how you can up your entrepreneurial skills. It's about upskilling small business entrepreneurs by focusing on things like financial management in your business, working on how to be a better human resources manager in a small business. I'm not talking about a human resources manager in a large company, how you can manage your employees effectively in your small business, how to be a good executive, how to make better decisions, how to lead your company. We address all those skills, build on them over time, and it's absolutely free, and you should check it out. It's in the link to this podcast description. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for watching. For Dr. Heller, I'm Micah, and we're out of here.